The studio lights burned hot, and the tension was hotter. It was supposed to be a polite political roundtable. Just another segment on primetime cable. The host had invited Candace Owens for her usual fiery commentary, and sitting across from her, quietly confident, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The topic? Education reform in underserved communities. The host barely finished the opening question before Candace launched her first attack. Well, let's be honest, she said with a sly grin, the reason these communities keep failing is because their so-called leaders, like Congresswoman Crockett over there, are more focused on sound bites than solutions. A few chuckles echoed in the studio. Candace leaned back, pleased with herself. Jasmine didn't blink. She gently set down her pen, folded her hands, and looked straight at Candace. Are we doing stunts tonight, or are we solving problems? The air tightened. The audience held its breath. Jasmine wasn't done. Because if you want to play games, I'll remind you, I write laws that actually pass. What exactly do you do again besides talk over people who do the work? The host's eyes widened. Even Candace seemed caught off guard. For a moment, just a flicker, her trademark smirk faltered. The crowd didn't clap, not yet, but the energy shifted. Everyone felt it. Crockett had just flipped the script. Candace recovered quickly, she always did. With a practiced smile, she leaned forward and said, well, I didn't realize we were handing out medals for mediocrity tonight. If writing bills that die in committee is your flex, be my guest. The jab was sharp. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a calm, deliberate smile that signaled she was just getting started. Candace, she said, her tone cool but commanding, you spend most of your time criticizing the black community from a safe distance. I spend mine inside the struggle, working on reform, education access, and actual legislation. You sell controversy. I build coalitions. Candace opened her mouth to respond, but Jasmine continued, her voice growing firmer. You use your platform to shame, not to serve. You tear down, but you don't lift up. I don't need applause, I need results. And I get them. That was when the crowd finally reacted. A low ripple of applause broke out across the room, hesitant at first, but building. The host tried to regain control, but the moment had already landed. Candace was still smiling, but her eyes darted for support. Her usual dominance on air was slipping. Meanwhile, Jasmine turned slightly toward the camera, speaking directly to the audience now. Leadership isn't about volume. It's about vision. And I won't let loud distractions drown out real progress, not tonight. The message was clear, Candace had poked the wrong giant. Candace shifted in her seat. For the first time all night, she didn't interrupt. That alone said everything. The host, trying to steady the broadcast, jumped in with a new question, this one about voter suppression. Ms. Owens, do you believe voter access is truly under threat, as some claim? Candace seized the opportunity. I believe what's under threat is personal responsibility. Everyone's blaming the system instead of teaching people how to beat it. We keep pretending the bar is too high, when really, Jasmine raised a hand, politely but firmly. No. You don't get to whitewash policy with buzzwords. Candace blinked. Jasmine leaned in, eyes locked. You talk about beating the system like it's a video game. But some of us have to live inside that system every single day, and we've seen it target our communities over and over. Not by accident. By design. The room quieted again. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Access to the ballot isn't charity. It's a right. And when polling places close, when IDs are restricted, when districts are gerrymandered into nonsense, that's not a coincidence. That's an attack. And some of us are fighting it. Not philosophizing about it from a studio. A pause. Then, applause. Stronger this time. Even a few members of the production crew nodded from behind the cameras. Candace tried to speak, but Jasmine held the floor now. This isn't about theory. It's about lived reality. If you've never waited 5 hours to vote, don't lecture those who have. Candace's smirk returned, but it was thinner. Worn. This wasn't going like her usual wins. Candace adjusted her mic and forced a small chuckle, brushing off the applause. Well, Congresswoman, you certainly know how to spin a narrative, she said, voice sugar-coated with sarcasm. But emotional storytelling doesn't fix broken families, bad schools, or crime rates. Jasmine leaned forward slowly. And denial doesn't fix policy failure. The room tensed again. Let's talk about what actually does fix things, Jasmine continued. Funding public education. Expanding access to healthcare. Making sure the minimum wage actually allows families to live, not just survive. Candace interrupted, and bankrupting the economy in the process. Jasmine didn't skip a beat. What bankrupts the economy, she said evenly, is pretending billionaires need tax breaks more than kids need food. The audience stirred. Then Jasmine turned the tables even further. Since we're being honest, Candace, when was the last time you visited a public school in an underserved zip code, not for a photo op, but to listen? Silence. Jasmine pressed on. Have you walked through East St. Louis? North Tulsa? Fifth Ward? Because I have. Not with a camera crew, but with teachers, organizers, and kids who still believe someone's fighting for them. Candace opened her mouth, but Jasmine raised her hand calmly. You speak to America from a stage. I speak from the ground. That's the difference. It landed like a brick. The host glanced at the control booth, the numbers were spiking. The conversation had shifted from political theater to something deeper, more dangerous, for Candace. And she knew it. Candace's usual fire had cooled into something else, a tight smile, carefully held in place. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, trying to regain control. It's easy to throw shade when you're standing on a broken system. But I built my platform by telling uncomfortable truths. That's why people listen. Jasmine tilted her head. People also listen to conspiracy theories, Candace. Doesn't make them truth. A sharp "oh" rippled from the live audience. The host tried to move on, clearly flustered now, but Jasmine was laser-focused, and the viewers could feel it. She wasn't angry. She was deliberate. Surgical. You call it truth, but it's often just performance dressed in intellect. You critique the very movements that made it possible for you to sit where you sit. That's not bravery. That's branding. The comment hit harder than any shout could have. Candace's eyes narrowed, and for a second, the polished veneer cracked, just slightly. Jasmine finished with a calm, final note, you can criticize activism all you want. But don't forget, it was activism that opened the doors you now confidently walk through. Just remember to nod at the people who held them open. There it was, the shift from defense to dominance. Jasmine wasn't just sparring anymore. She was reclaiming space. The audience clapped again, louder this time. The sound wasn't just supportive, it was definitive. The segment was supposed to spotlight a debate. Instead, it had turned into a reckoning. Candace sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel it, the momentum had slipped through her fingers like sand. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't just standing firm, she was rising. The host, now visibly caught in the storm, turned the next question back to Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett, what would you say to people who think your passion is just political theater too? Jasmine smiled gently, not smugly, but with the calm of someone who had been asked that question 100 times, and already knew the answer. I'd say passion isn't theater when it's rooted in purpose. What you see here isn't for show, it's what you get in the room when the cameras are off and the stakes are real. She glanced toward Candace, then back to the camera. Some of us were raised on survival and had to earn every inch we now stand on. So if I speak with fire, it's because I know what it feels like to be unheard, unseen, and underestimated. And I promised myself, and my community, that once I had a mic, I wouldn't waste it pretending everything is fine. The room fell quiet again. Candace didn't interrupt. She couldn't. Jasmine continued, "Theater is empty. My voice carries names, neighborhoods, and generations. And I won't lower my volume to comfort those who've never had to raise theirs." Boom. The applause this time wasn't just loud, it was standing. Even the cameraman had to adjust for the shift as audience members rose to their feet. Candace glanced toward the host, hoping for a pivot. But it was too late. This wasn't Candace's show anymore. Jasmine Crockett had just taken the stage, and everyone knew it. Backstage, producers were already buzzing. Phones lit up. Social media clips from the last 5 minutes were flooding timelines. The hashtags were trending, hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag Candace cornered, hashtag not just theater but inside the studio. Candace Owens was recalibrating, fast. She straightened up, put on her most diplomatic smile, and said, "Well, if nothing else, I admire your conviction, Congresswoman. Even if I fundamentally disagree with your methods." It was a classic Candace maneuver, pivot to grace after the sting. Jasmine, however, wasn't playing the game. "You don't have to agree with my methods," she said calmly. "But you do have to deal with the results." Candace raised an eyebrow. Jasmine leaned in just slightly. "And if your brand requires dismissing the people still fighting for basic dignity, maybe it's time to ask who your message is really serving." Boom. Again. The host attempted a nervous chuckle. "Well, this has certainly been a passionate discussion," but the audience wasn't laughing. They were locked in. Candace offered one final attempt. "You speak like someone with all the answers, Jasmine. Just be careful, arrogance and certainty look the same from a distance." Jasmine didn't flinch. "And deflection and defeat sound the same when the echo chamber finally cracks." The room was stunned. Again. Candace blinked, then looked away. This time, she had no retort. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, clips of the showdown had exploded online. One particular snippet, Jasmine's line, "Deflection and defeat sound the same when the echo chamber finally cracks," was already being turned into audio reels, t-shirts, and quote graphics. Cable news reran the exchange on loop. Pundits weighed in, split as always. But the public had made its decision, and the internet was on fire. In the green room, Jasmine sat quietly, sipping water, scrolling through the chaos. Her chief of staff peeked in. "It's everywhere. Even Fox is talking about it." Jasmine smirked. "Let me guess, I was hostile and unhinged." Her aide grinned. "They called you too confident. So, mission accomplished." Meanwhile, just down the hall, Candace's team was scrambling. She stood stiffly while her publicist spoke in hushed tones on the phone. Her usual post-show glow was missing. The applause, the power, had slipped away. She had come to dominate the stage. Instead, she'd been upstaged. Online, comments were ruthless. Candace brought a soundbite. Jasmine brought substance. This wasn't a debate. It was a dismantling. Owens just met a mirror that talks back. Candace's brand had weathered controversy before, but this wasn't scandal. It was exposure. And Jasmine? She didn't just win a debate. She left a mark. By morning, the headlines were unanimous. Jasmine Crockett dominates live debate with Owens. Internet erupts, Owens outmaneuvered. Crockett's calm precision stuns viewers, new face of leadership. Crockett's viral moment sparks movement, cable anchors replayed her lines with awe. Editorials poured in from every angle, some praising her composure, others warning that she was becoming too influential, too fast. And that's when it shifted from viral to political. Within 24 hours, Jasmine received interview requests from nearly every major outlet. Young organizers began quoting her in rallies. Even members of Congress, including some who rarely agreed with her, sent quiet nods of respect. One senior member of her own party pulled her aside in a Capitol hallway. "You didn't just make a point," he said. "You made a model." Meanwhile, Candace's camp was in full spin mode. She issued a carefully worded tweet, "I'll always challenge the status quo, even when the mob doesn't like it. Good debate requires disagreement." It got likes. But not like Jasmine's response, posted just an hour later with no filter, no team-approved phrasing. "When you speak truth, you don't need a defense team. You need a calendar, to keep up with what comes next." Retweets. Thousands. She was no longer just part of the conversation. She was the conversation. Back in Washington, the effects rippled through the halls of power like a silent alarm. Committees where Jasmine once struggled to get her proposals heard were suddenly more attentive. Lawmakers who once dismissed her as too bold were now leaning in. Lobbyists asked for meetings. Think tanks started citing her soundbites in policy briefs. One senior senator was overheard muttering, "She's not just rising, she's cutting a new path." But Jasmine stayed grounded. In a private strategy meeting with her team, she was clear. "We didn't win anything just by going viral," she said. "That moment doesn't matter unless we use it to move real policy. Visibility without strategy is just noise." Still, her team couldn't ignore it. Donations had surged overnight. Volunteers signed up by the thousands. And national endorsements quietly trickled in. Meanwhile, Candace's team pushed a new media appearance, a redemption roundtable. But interest was lukewarm. The energy had moved on. Even some of Candace's usual allies distanced themselves, wary of appearing tone-deaf. Her once commanding presence now felt predictable. The world had seen something new. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She had become a force, articulate, composed, and unshakable under fire. And the political world was adjusting to a new reality. Candace may have started the conversation, but Jasmine had ended it on her terms. Behind closed doors, a different storm was brewing. Think tanks, political influencers, and party strategists, many of whom had never paid Jasmine Crockett more than passing attention, now spoke her name in late-night calls and off-the-record memos. Not all of them were fans. "She's too sharp," one consultant warned. "Too hard to control. She connects directly." "That's dangerous," another whispered. "No filters. No handlers." The establishment, left and right, had been comfortable shaping narratives through media personalities. But Jasmine? She had sidestepped all that. She spoke plainly, factually, and with precision that couldn't be clipped out of context. In conservative media circles, Candace's stumble became a cautionary tale. She walked in to humiliate Crockett, one podcast host admitted. Instead, she gave her a microphone and a megaphone. Candace Owens, ever defiant, began reframing the event on her own platform. She posted slick videos suggesting the debate had been rigged, the crowd handpicked, the edit unfair. But the full clip was everywhere. Uncut. Unfiltered. Jasmine hadn't needed help, she'd needed a seat at the table. And once she had it, she built her own platform right on top of it. Meanwhile, Jasmine doubled down. She returned to the House floor and delivered a bill proposal aimed at protecting voting access in underserved districts, referencing, without naming, the very issues she dismantled during the televised debate. It wasn't just a media victory anymore. It was a movement taking shape. Weeks later, the debate was no longer trending, but its impact had only grown. On college campuses, Jasmine's exchange with Candace was being studied in political science and communications classes. Civil rights groups invited her to speak not just as a representative, but as a strategist. She had become something rare, a politician with both intellect and edge, capable of commanding rooms and changing narratives in real time. And Candace? She remained in the spotlight, but something had changed. Her audience was still loyal, but the aura of invincibility had faded. No amount of bravado could erase the clarity of that moment on stage. The moment she had underestimated someone, and the world had watched it unravel. In a quiet moment after a long session, Jasmine stood alone in her office, looking out at the Capitol dome. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a young black woman in Detroit. "I've never cared about politics. But after what you said to her, I registered to vote today. Thank you." Jasmine smiled, set the phone down, and whispered to herself, "This is why I do it." Because for Jasmine Crockett, it was never about clapping back. It was about pushing forward. One moment had flipped the script. And now, she was writing the next chapter, on her terms, with her voice, for the people who saw themselves in her fight. The mic wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who finally felt heard.